And now, please welcome Group CEO of Awaze, Henrik Kjellberg, and co-founder and CEO of Evolve, Brian Egan, in discussion with Skift short-term rental reporter Srividya Kalyanaraman.
Lively room.
Yeah.
Good crowd.
Good crowd.
Are we waiting to get started? Thank you so much for being here. So I'm going to give a second so everybody gets settled. OK, perfect. So we heard from Westcap, Marriott, and Saunders. So is it time for the first short-term rental session yet for the day?
Yes,
so we have the largest suppliers in Europe and US here. Awaze, we have over 110 properties in the portfolio and 30,000 properties. So it's very intentional to have both of you here on stage today to basically ask, why don't we have you playing in each other's markets? Or why don't we have anybody kind of crossing over and merging continents?
I'm happy to take a swing at it,
Sure.
and I'll let Henrik. So I would say, first of all, it's a difficult business. And when you talk about the domestic market in the US, domestic for us, it's a much less mature market than in Europe. So I think you're talking about a bit of apples and oranges in terms of the maturity of the relative markets, the types of companies. I mean, you have a brand that's, 75 years old or something within your portfolio, whereas everybody playing at scale in the US has been built roughly in the last 10 years. So I think that's one thing. The other would be, and this is just from my perspective, really interested to hear what Henrik has to say, is for us, the US is the largest greenfield opportunity in the world right now. There's 9 million vacation properties. There's about 2 million, 2.5, people debate the number, that are rented out on a short-term basis every year. And the 2 or 3 or 4 largest players in the whole space, us included, have less than 100,000 of those properties under management. So we see this as a very early stage game right now, and we think there's a lot of room to grow here. So for us to overcome the barrier of wanting to go cross-border and take on all the operational complexity of that, we'd have to weigh that against further growth and getting to more market share in the US.
Yeah, I mean, very, very similar for us. I mean, I think I believe in going deep as opposed to going wide. Somebody mentioned a vanity metric before. It's easy to get, well, how many countries do you have or how many properties do you have? But density matters. I mean, it's better to be in fewer markets and have more properties. And I believe in Europe we have something like 20 million second homes. That's 20 million second homes. We have north of 100,000. There's plenty left to do. And the US market is very different. And again, if you go to the US market, you also have to think about, how do you get customer acquisition? And this is a very competitive market as well, as is Europe. So yeah, I think it is, for us right now, we have plenty left to do in the markets where we are, and I'm happy to stay busy in our lane for now.
So you're saying that wider is not bigger. So you want to go deep.
I think it just makes more economic sense when you're property managing, when you're doing things. There are economic. We heard from Saunders before, it's easier to have a building than 2 rooms in a building, and the same applies to a market. It's better for us to have another X amount of properties in a given market where we are, because we get more scale benefits from it. That's not to say, however, that I think over time, everything in travel has ended up going global. So I think in the sort of medium to long term, yes, of course, this industry as well is going to become globalized.
Yeah, I mean, the industrial logic of it holds up. I think it's just, if you're achieving what you believe is close to a maximum growth rate within, for us, an ethos of wanting that growth to be very durable over time, you're not going to go take on all the other challenges that come with, and the capital outlays that come with, going cross-border for the first time.
So if we try to understand how hard it is to grow supply, and as more operators emerge and come up in the market, how restrictive does it become to grow quality supply? Or actually, let's start with, how do you define quality supply?
Well, I think it's great. I mean, please give me a villa with a pool and a hot tub on an exclusive basis that's next to the other ones we have, so I can just manage them. That would be wonderful. Of course, when you go after these properties,
Wish list.
we try to be selective. We visit all of them, etc. But you're going to get a mix, and you also need a mix for your guest base. You sort of, not everybody's going to want to stay in a sort of super high-end property. And so I think, there's a lot of properties out there. And getting them is not necessarily that hard. It's then making sure that you have the availability, that you control the pricing, that the pricing is correct, and that they, as the sort of the owners are interested in actually having this as a business. So getting supply, not super hard. Getting great supply that kind of works with you and is the right mix. Yeah, that's hard.
Yeah, I would say framed from the guest perspective, it's a property that you feel after your stay compelled to leave a 5-star review, right? And as we all know in our category, that doesn't mean luxury. That means it was safe, it was clean, it was ready for my arrival, it was as advertised. And then from our point of view, standing between the owner and the guest, that asset owner, for us, that's a partnership. And like most partnerships, I think it's really important that we're aligned on the goals. And I think Henrik was pointing at the same thing. First of all, that has to be an exclusive. And they have to understand what that guest is looking for. And we have to be very clear and aligned on our relative responsibilities in order to be successful in our partnership. That's what quality supply looks like for us. We have an interesting, a different model, and I think, maybe a different viewpoint in the sense that while we want to go deep in the US, we're also very capable of going out on the long tail and operating without geodensity as a constraint. And that's because we partner for our local services. Right. And we think that that's actually a great model, and our guest review scores show it. So that allows us to go everywhere. Now that creates a really interesting opportunity and challenge on how you acquire all that supply and how you partner with all of these owners. We mentioned 30,000 properties. We've gotten there by partnering with one owner at a time, brick by brick. And that's why it took a few years to get here, more than a few.
But is there a way to do that faster? So when we talk about crossing borders, if you think about the same analogy to cross markets, would acquisitions be one way to do that while also kind of grabbing more of the market share and consolidating?
Yeah, I think there's two ways to look at that. For us, our model is very different. I think we have a disruptive take on vacation rental management generally. Mm-hmm. And so for us to go buying smaller property managers and rolling them up is really, again, maybe a round peg in a square hole. That's not the value proposition that their underlying owners have come to expect. It's not the business that they're running. So we're going to have to go through people know that integrations are the hardest part of doing deals. And for us, that integration is going to be an order of magnitude harder because it's a different business that we operate. So we've never found the return profile on those types of investments to be that enticing. On the other hand, we also have been able to do this faster and faster. So those 30,000 properties, the first 10,000 took us 7.5 years. The next 10,000 took us 3.5, and the last 10,000 took us 1 year and 1 month.
Yeah, I think we'll do. So getting properties is also competitive. So we do. We're on PPC, social media bidding. We're the owners. We have local teams, which really helps. So they're very good at knowing these properties are available, and of course we also do. We've done over, I think, 20 deals since we were owned by the current owners. And so it's a mixture of, when do we think it's cheaper to kind of acquire organically, but sometimes, we will find a great asset in a given location, like Croatia, where we did 3 deals last year, and we sort of, completed those deals. Now, as you also mentioned, Brian, buying companies, anybody, it's like, driving a race car in a straight line. Anybody could do that. It's, integrating is where the magic comes in, and you need to have the expertise in the team and the, platform abilities to do it as well. So otherwise, for us, the primary model is organic, mm-hmm. Secondary model is M&A, but it's also a very important one for us.
And just to be clear, this isn't a matter of us being dogmatic. I think it's really being quite pragmatic and saying, here's how we think that we can allocate capital and what the return profiles of that allocation look like. I would think about things very differently if I had Henrik's position in Europe, more mature markets, companies to buy, large market share, not as much of that greenfield opportunity, and by the way, having built the muscle of doing those integrations over time, and I'm presuming having a really effective playbook. Those are all ingredients in that formula that would change the game.
And I think both Awaze and Evolve can afford to be picky about, the candidates or the companies that you evaluate and you choose. But if you were to, what would be those opportunities that you would be looking at?
In terms of an acquisition? I guess I would say, I think in the US, our focus on M&A would likely not be supply driven. It would be more about the platform that we offer. So I think that might be more technology or data driven. I think that for us, acquisition is more likely to be, if you sort of gave me tell you a use case in which we're going to go buy for supply for the first time in our 10+ year history, it would be because we went cross-border and we went into a market that was more established, where we didn't think that going from 0 to 1 organic, brick by brick, was going to be the right move. I mean, that is it's a long haul, and given where we are as a company now, we wouldn't want to wait 7.5 years to get to 10,000 properties, right? We would be making that move to have a much higher rate of velocity.
And for us, it would be, almost the opposite, which is like very supply driven.
Yeah.
So we're looking for great location, could be somewhere in Cornwall, which is a place in the southwest of the UK, or Croatia, as I mentioned, and where we feel that the company we're looking at, where they have very strong owner relationships. So those things are really important to us when we look at an acquisition.
So one of those like owned by Janes and Joes in like a cottage somewhere.
There are so, so I'm relatively, I know this room, we have a lot of people from the industry, but I'm sort of 5 years into this segment of the industry. I was in like the wider travel before. But there is just so many, even in the UK, which we thought we had mapped like really well, and we still get like, what's this company? And there's like 300 and they do it really well and the owners are super happy. And so there's a lot of that around. It's as everybody here knows, but it's extremely fragmented and a lot of great companies and targets out there still.
I think it's really important that the Janes and the Joes thing is a critical element of understanding this category at a really deep level, because even when you see XYZ property management and you evaluate that business on its merits and its P&L and balance sheet and what have you, you have to understand that the asset owner is ultimately the Janes and the Joes, right? They're all there all the time, and you have to look through to understand what your partnership, I believe, if you want to have like a real shot at equity value creation in this space as a management platform, you have got to get to that partnership. You have to get to the part where the person paying the mortgage is ultimately your partner in that deal. And anybody in between you and them means that you actually do not have an exclusive, you don't have your hands on that supply, and you're no longer really in the shoes of the supplier. You've drifted into being the marketplace. And I think that's a dangerous game to play, because we all know the marketplace is out there and there's very few of them and they're very big and they're very effective.
Yeah, and thank you for that answer. I think it also builds into how we think about scale, right, in the industry. So I want to talk a little bit about business. Awaze is an institution, and Evolve, you've been around for a while. You understand the market.
We're sub-institution, is that what I'm taking for this? Okay, fair enough,
but you've been around. There's history. You've understood the market, and there's a lot of chatter in every call. We talk about how do we balance cash flow and scale. So how do you do that right now in this market? I know Evolve recently had a round of layoffs. And where do you see the market now, and how are you preparing for what you see?
Yeah, addressing the layoff directly, that's, first of all, super hard, and it should be, and a direct result of the largest economic dislocation we've gone through in 15 years since the great financial crisis.
Right.
Not a reflection of the strength of the business at all, but quite simply, we're going to have fewer bookings, fewer stays, fewer guests, slightly fewer owners than we expected this year. And unfortunately, sometimes as a leader, you have to make the decision that is best for all the stakeholders of the company, even if that has a really profound impact on a smaller subset of your team. And I take full accountability, at all times for those decisions, and I know that this one was the right one to take for the company. That said, I think, as I think about this market, it's a super healthy and vibrant market. We are still well above pre-pandemic baselines on bookings and revenue per property. We are still in a market that, again, has a huge greenfield opportunity on supply acquisition. And in my mind, as much as a founder, co-founder, CEO, of course, the zero interest rate world and the valuations that came with it were kind of fun to throw around. But I think this is a much healthier climate. It does not incentivize diseconomic behavior. And I think everybody now realizes gravity exists, and we have to be pursuing profitable, durable growth. That's a good thing. That's what our category should be doing. And if we want to assume what I think is the place at the table we belong in, which is right there next to air, hotel, and car, we're going to have to do that. And I think the faster we get there as a category, the better. That's the journey that we're certainly on and always have been, quite frankly.
And how does that work at Awaze? Because
so as you mentioned, we were, so we're private equity owned, and this used to be, although you call us an institution, but we used to be like 4 or 5 different institutions because the brands were not aligned. So we were building and putting the brands on a common platform and doing that. So for us, it's the fact that we're profitable. We were profitable and have been profitable for decades, but again, we've been around for decades. So it's not like I did something incredibly good there. Now, but it's a balance of like how fast do we want to grow versus what's the return on in-year profitability, and obviously when you have the type of ownership we do, that becomes that's a discussion. Do you want to grow a bit faster and have a bit less profits, or do you want to have a bit more profit and grow slightly slower? So we're thinking about that too. It's just that we're a different end or different part of the spectrum.
So, sorry, but by the way, there's nothing new here, right? Businesses have always been worth a discounted current view of their future cash flow. So I think that the trade-off between profitability and growth is like, we're being reminded of it, but this is not a new phenomenon. And I think, again, one that the faster that we come to grips with that as an industry and not sort of pursue growth just by lighting large piles of money on fire, the better off we're all going to be. And I agree with you. I think the fact that it's now, everybody's becoming a bit more rational, because given we compete with, as I think Jenny mentioned earlier today, is like, we may have this kind of view of what the category is. The consumers may not. They're thinking about, trip types, or so on the marketing or guest acquisition side, you're competing. So the more you have rational players there and who are not spending way too much money to Google. Apologies to anybody from Google. But I think, Mountain View is doing just fine already. So to the extent that you have a bit more rationality in the overall travel category, that's a great thing, and that kind of makes it more of an even playing field, because everybody's thinking about how am I going to get a return? Yeah. And so, we've had, in the past few years, we've had cases, at least in Europe, where you see players who are just spending incredibly aggressively, and so that becomes, a bit more of a challenge. So those things are rationality is a good thing for us.
Yeah, I'm actually fascinated you said that, because Awaze as a brand, like as several institutions put together, you have that kind of power, but you still think about it being conservative and being rational about how you think about like scaling, not too much, not too fast, but at the pace that you can still. Well,
we just want to make sure, in the end, again, this is going to sound maybe a bit simplistic, but are we delivering a great owner experience? Are we delivering a great guest experience? And we're taking care of the owners that we onboard, and so we have to do that. And as everybody who's been in travel, it's an extremely competitive field, right? Including then the short-term rental space, vacation rental space, and yes, of course we think about level of growth and of course we want to grow as quickly as possible, but making sure we deliver that service to the owners and to the guests, and that it's a great holiday, because otherwise they won't come back. So I want this to be a really great experience when you go on holiday with us.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty relevant to stay on that thought, because we have an audience question. They ask, what are some of the strategies you've both used in response to the current conditions? I think this is relevant. Lower rates, extended stay discounts, loyalty, perks, or interior improvements. I'm guessing amenities?
Do you want to go, Brian?
Sure. I would say mostly for us, it's driven by what we're doing on rates, cancellation policies, refundability, and then also, some of that's just reacting to market conditions. If you go back, even pre-pandemic, just to give you all a baseline, it was very normal in our industry to put up to 50% down at the point of booking, completely non-refundable, without regard to how far in advance you booked. That was true in like 2019, right? And you think about that now, there's no way you could be competitive in the demand market. And I think that's here to stay forever. That's also part of mainstreaming as a category and reaching a mainstream consumer, which we all know the pandemic kind of accelerated that process. So for us, that's a constant test and learn game, and we are always running myriad experiments to understand what is going to ultimately do the best for the guest, convert the most, and create the best economics for us and our owners. When it comes to interior improvements and such, that's really more us advising as a partner to the owner, hey, here's what the market's responding to. If you want to invest in your property, for you, maybe a hot tub and improved Wi-Fi are going to do the trick, and that's what we would advise. But it's not a capital allocation sort of exercise for us.
I think Seth mentioned at the beginning in terms of how much inflation has been in the category. Let's remember, we used to be like a cheaper alternative to a hotel.
That's right.
And one of the reasons Brian is pushing these room category is because it's gone, slightly off the charts, just general pricing levels. I mean, in the UK, where you basically in 2021, you couldn't leave. It was like Hotel California. You were like, you were stuck with all the rules of going in and out. And so the prices went up a lot, and the owners got like hooked on the drug. Yeah. And then they think like, my house is worth $5,000. Well, it used to be worth $2,000, right? Yeah. No, it's worth $5,000. So yeah, I mean, we work with dynamic pricing. We're trying to talk to owners about how they can, make more revenue. But in fairness, some of our properties are, the price points are too high, and so we're making a real effort to kind of get them down, doing discounts, obviously working on the things like more flexible cancellations and other things as well. But yeah, I think what the owners or what some owners have forgotten is that this is not a discrete category for the guest. Yeah. They will compare with a hotel. They will compare in Europe with a flight-inclusive tour. How cheap is it to go to Mallorca with the TUI, or versus going to Cornwall? And not saying Cornwall is bad, but the weather in Mallorca is slightly more predictable. If you're tired of the rain, but so I think in general, I think that the at least what we're seeing is. And what we're working with the owners on is try to kind of convince them. And of course, it's hard for them because cost of cleaning is up, and all these other things, and electricity and gas bills. But yeah, I think that's been you can see Airbnb doing it. I think one of the reasons Brian is, I'm not Airbnb, but one of the reasons he's pushing rooms is it's a way to get the price point down and kind of reminding people that, look, we used to be not saying that it's a worse thing than a hotel, but it's a different experience. And one of the things that the category had going for it was the value prop, which was this is you don't get all the same service, but you also pay a bit less.
So do you think that the consumer for a hotel is distinctly still different and is unforgiving?
No, I think it's exactly the same. I believe exactly like in trip type. I think this is one of the things that people who are not from travel misunderstand from travel. Right. They go like, oh, if you buy a Gucci bag, you're a Gucci customer or whatever. Like in travel, it's like, look, I went hiking in Albania last weekend, okay? And we stayed in very simple guest houses, right? Loved it. And then I'm going to Venice for, an anniversary in October. And I'm staying in like a very nice hotel with my wife. Brilliant. Like, but you don't get that kind of differentiation in many other categories. If you like Audis, you're unlikely to kind of go for a Lada, right? You're sort of Audi or maybe or Audi or a Mercedes person, but in travel you really have that kind of breadth because the trips we go for, all of us in this room, can be very varied.
We see it on our own platform where repeat business, 1 minute is going to look like a drive from Denver, where we're headquartered, where I live. You might be driving up to, Summit County, Breckenridge for the weekend, and you just need a place close enough, pretty simple there and back trip for the weekend to get some good snow. You're going to look completely different if you're going to Hawaii and you're meeting up with your 2 siblings and all of their kids, and maybe somebody's bringing a nanny and one of the sets of parents is coming in, and it's this big family trip, and suddenly it looks like this big luxury spend. They're in an 8-bedroom villa, and it's just this incredible thing, and back and forth again. And that's happening just within what we do, and the same thing can be said, writ large in the whole travel category for sure.
And that's one of the reasons I think, people are working, and obviously programs like Bonvoy or Expedia is doing it, but like that's why loyalty is a tricky thing, because it's a very different purchase depending on the trip you take.
Yeah, especially when it comes to short-term rentals. I think when the branding, I think Seth spoke about that, and I think that also continues to pose a challenge. If you have established brands, it's easier to have the loyalty programs, no? Has that been your experience?
Yeah, but I think, you see it, it's interesting hearing the Sonder perspective from Francis, because it's sort of one, whereas the hotels have clearly differentiated into many, because the experience is so different depending on what you do. And, so maybe the soft brand concept kind of works and people kind of understand what it is. But yeah, I think it's, we have very, very a wider range of properties, and I think that's one of the challenges as an operator. How do you kind of establish? I mean, I know what a Courtyard by Marriott is going to look like, but or is it Hilton? So did I miss that up? I'm meeting with Jenny afterwards. It's going to be really bad if I got that wrong. But you sort of know what that looks like, and for our properties, we have a very wide range of, like, let's call them 3-star. We actually even have 2-star in some sort of parts of Western Denmark, and then to go up to like a full kind of almost 6-star in Mallorca. And it's under the same brand. So that's hard maybe to explain from a brand perspective.
On the other hand, though, it's actually, go back to what we just said. A given consumer is going to flex up and down that value chain over time. And so I think that as we think about repeat and referral business, it's actually a huge advantage to have 30,000 properties, and in our case, in 750, 800 defined geo markets across the US, because the odds of us having the property that you want for that next trip have now skyrocketed. And so you're only so loyal to any one segment of that value chain because you're only going to go. I mean, by the way, this is also short-term rental. It's not something you're doing 3 times a week, right? It's not something that you're doing. This is maybe 2 or 3 times a year for a pretty active traveler, and you're probably not in the same segment of the value chain throughout that time. So I think long-term, it really plays to our advantage, but we're in the very early innings of that. I think as a category, supplier brands in the US are still relatively nascent in the journey of sort of getting to unaided awareness and that sort of thing.
Thank you for that answer. I want to sort of pivot the conversation and talk about distribution and demand, our favorite topic. And Henrik, I want to draw from your experience at Expedia. So how much do you think great supply, having these beautiful properties, how well or does that translate to direct demand? Or is that enough to kind of reduce the dependency on, say, platforms or?
I mean, I think it's a subset of part of our properties, given that they're exclusive. Definitely, we will. And we control them, so we channel manage, and we open and close the categories just like a hotel chain would, because I know that these houses, and I don't need any help in August for very particular properties.
Right.
But equally, we have very good relationships with the third parties. We just came from a position where we had. I think we do 72% of our demand is direct. So we
72%.
use, so 28% is third parties. Now, I don't necessarily, I don't want to kind of, I'd like to have all of it direct, and I'd like to have everybody typing in the name and not going via Google. It's like direct can be more expensive than third party. That's another misunderstanding.
Okay.
Right, because if you do PPC unbranded, if you go and bid for that, that's or social, but that can be very expensive. So, of course, like everybody in this room, I wanted people to come back to me all the time and never leave the confines. That's not reality. So of course we work on. So look, we appreciate the partnerships we have. We have many and good ones, but we're always looking at the balance of what's a customer acquisition cost, and how do I, and the negative with the third parties, of course, I don't get the data. Right. So I can't remarket to them. Right. It's an obvious thing, but I want that email so that I can market back to people and kind of incentivize them to come back to me, hopefully through what we call organic repeat, which is either through email or direct type in next year. If they come back via Google unbranded, again, I'm paying money for it. So we try to build the website and the experience such that people come back and go back to us directly, which is what I think any rational operator, and including Marriott, including all the other brands, is trying to do as well. So we're all competing for that.
Yeah, that's the dream.
That's the dream.
Brian.
Well, if I go back to the beginning of your question, I'd say, aligned with Henrik here,
Yeah.
it starts with great supply. I mean, it starts with quality supply, as I define that, right? A 5-star experience and those brand standards, and being able to do that repeatably at scale. It's interesting how so much of the travel business is doing the basics repeatedly at scale as you grow at higher and higher rates, or grow at higher and higher aggregate amounts off of off of large numbers. I think that's got to be the sort of table stakes of it. And then as I think about how that helps us drive direct, it's what I was just mentioning. It's having a footprint of 30,000 properties gives us a much more interesting value proposition to say to you as a guest, why don't you come back and book with Evolve again? You can book that same home for the same dates if that's what you want to do, but you could book a home that has nothing to do with that. You can go from the relatively, kind of average ski condo in Breckenridge to the villa in Hawaii and back again, and you can do it on one platform where you know that there is a consistency of those brand standards, of the fact that you're going to want to leave that 5-star review afterwards, that these are vetted and verified properties. I think for us, the big belief is it's about consistency in the inventory. It's not about conformity. It doesn't have to be the case that they are all looking the same and have the same amenities and all of the rest. I think that's the hotel game, 4 formats, and that's what a Courtyard by Marriott, by the way, so Jenny won't be mad at you.
I blame jet lag.
That's what they do well. I think what we do well is embrace the fact that it's not commoditized, that every home is N equals 1 unique. That's what what guests love about it, is that it feels like a home. That's what's wonderful as a human about going over and having dinner with friends or meeting new people and going into their homes and seeing that experience. It's a completely different level of connection. And I think we ought to have to embrace all of that and create enough consistency around it that it's going to be safe and clean and ready for your arrival and as advertised.
I think the one thing I would say on this again is, if you think that just having the supply is enough and that's going to set you, those are all the graveyard of travel industry companies who didn't make it are the ones who just thought, like, I'm just going to curate the supply, I'm just going to be focusing on this and not. So supply, yes, it starts with supply, but you really have to pay attention to like how you build your demand channels and how you kind of think about that over time and look at your customer acquisition costs. Because there's so many, for those of you, I'm old in this industry now, but like there's a lot of companies that thought like, wow, this is so unique. But again, remember that the guest will shop around. The guest will shop around.
And by the way, for every supplier in any category I can think of, direct is always going to be, the best economics.
Right.
But let's don't forget that the economics of having empty nights are terrible. The economics of having owner churn because you're not performing are terrible. And so I think these partnerships do have a lot of value, and I don't think it has to be viewed as some sort of completely zero-sum us versus them game. I mean, I think those are very aligned partnerships as well. They play an important role in our growth. And yes, like everyone else, we love to book direct as well.
And you see it with like a different category, but like the OTAs and the hotel chains are both still around.
Yeah.
They're both like, they're like.
Turns out Marriott and Booking.com have done.
They're both still around. They're both great companies, and then of course they try to fight to get the and slightly different value props, but. Yeah, we're 20 years in after the OTAs, or maybe 25 years in after the OTAs started, and they're kind of I hate the word competition, but like they both coexist at least.
Yep. Thank you so much for the fascinating conversation. That's all we have time for, and yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.